Just came across a podcast called Ultra Rare, and it's a podcast that deals with Web3 ideas and technologies. And one of the big ideas that is being discussed there actually is publishing in the Web3 world. I want to discuss this because I think it's a very interesting concept, and it's also a possibility to reconcile why Elon Musk is trying to buy Twitter. This is an Not Even Wrong podcast. It's April 24th, 2022. This is Delco. It's a Sunday. There's no update. We are down 15% for the year. The market's down 10.5%. We're underperforming by 4.5%. So let's jump right into it. This podcast is very interesting. Shout out to the people that are running this podcast. It's about Web3 stuff, and they have an episode recently about scientific publishing in the Web3 world. Now, why is this even a topic? Why is this interesting? Here's why this is interesting. Because we have, let's talk about scientific publishing, but then we will easily be able to make the bridge over to any kind of publishing and hence Twitter. So what scientific publishing is today is that we have a couple of journals that if you get into those journals, that's very prestigious. And then you publish your stuff, people read it, and then you get quotes from those publications. And this is kind of how your prestige grows in academia. This is how you get tenure. This is how you get prestigious jobs in academia. This is how you go up the ladder in terms of, let's say you're at the University X and you want to go to University Y and end up at the top of the ladder, which is in your field, maybe University Z or Q or whoever is the top of the top in your field. So this is kind of how it works today. And what these authors are saying is that the scientific publishing world is broken because of three things. One is there's lots of rent seeking by the journals who have the power to put you in a place that is prestigious. Second, there it's very slow. And third, the monetization is very difficult for people who have let me rephrase that. There is not a lot of opportunity for sort of building on top of each other, small piecemeal type of publishing, maybe just or what they call composability in Web3. That would be one of the big advantages. But I don't want to jump ahead here. Let's stay with the traditional world. So if you, let's say you have a good data set. Let's say you don't have a lot of theories yet, but you just have a really good data set to, let's say you're Andrej Karpathy, you work for Tesla, you have a very unique data set in terms of self-driving car technology. You could just publish that data set, just that data set alone. And today you can't do that. I mean, you're not going to be able to publish in the most prestigious AI journal just a data set. No, the way it works is you have to have a theory, and it has to be interesting and creative, and it has to be unconventional enough, but still conventional. And there's a lot of social, political, ego, human type stuff that drives decision making in terms of what gets published and what not. Why is the scientific publishing world broken? Well, my personal point is that actually science is broken. It's not the science. Scientific publishing is just the cart that is attached to the horses. The horses is science itself, and science is broken. But that's probably a whole other podcast on itself. What I want to say about in terms of scientific publishing is that we have plenty of examples of people who were trying to publish something. The most famous one that I came across in my academic career was when Black-Scholes were trying, or Merton, I forgot whoever came up with the probabilistic options pricing theory. They were trying to publish it in, I think, the Journal of Finance, and the people at Journal of Finance said, well, this has nothing to do with finance, and hence you can't publish it. So they just had to add the thing about bonds and bond pricing and stuff like that. It's just one of those typical examples. I think we have examples. Einstein wasn't able to publish some of his seminal papers, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of examples of people who did extremely interesting work and weren't able to publish. Let's also talk about one of the most recent and very interesting examples of how science works. It's the CRISPR technology evolution or revolution. You start with yogurt makers. They do stuff. They don't even know what they're coming upon here. They just find out certain repeated sequences in DNA and bacteria and all that kind of stuff. And then slowly it kind of trickles through the system until Jennifer Doudna and Michel Charpentier develop interesting technology that they call CRISPR, and then Feng Zhang and Chris Church and people at Harvard and David Liu and all these people jump on the bandwagon, and now they fight over patents and stuff, but it doesn't matter. The point here, same thing. It starts somewhere and then it proliferates. And I guess what the people in the Web3 world now are saying is, well, we can do better. Okay, that's what they're saying. And now let's talk about Web3 publishing. And then I want to jump over to Twitter, and maybe I see parallels why Musk wants to buy Twitter and how interesting this could be. So the Web3 world offers a couple of things that the traditional publishing world doesn't offer. One of the things it offers is it offers ownership of digital assets through NFTs. So you can have ownership of, you can put your data set out on the blockchain and own it. Okay, so that means there's obviously incentive, because ownership is the key to almost anything. And I want to talk about this also a little bit more deeper later. But let's say you can own stuff. Then there is the flexibility in the sense that you can do these little things. I mean, you can do anything you want on the blockchain, right? So then we also have monetization opportunities through tokens. So there's a couple of things that Web3 can do to circumvent this monolithic, rent-seeking, prestigious pyramid of scientific publishing. Again, I said in the prelude that I think science is broken, not scientific publishing. What do I mean by that is that I think science itself is broken, that the way we do science is we maximize for prestige. We don't actually maximize for something like long-term usability, or we want to help the world, or any of that stuff. Nobody cares about that. In the science world, the only thing that matters is prestige. That's what individual people, the actual people in the science world, are maximizing for. It's prestige. And I myself I'm not a scientist. I've been in academia quite a long time, so I have obviously some insight from that perspective. I've read tons of books and interviewed tons of people in the science world, particularly when I worked on the quantum computing ideas. So I've had some former and also recent experience with science. I can absolutely vouch for it. It is about prestige. So a prestige in many ways. And I think what's broken about this prestige thing is that very often the more complicated you are and the more you're able to impress your peers, the rather you would do something. And this might not be the most useful thing. I mean, just the book that I started reading right now about this girl that goes to Harvard, and she talks about, in this case, the literature world, and how the literature world is, extremely abstract and just asks questions. She says, she reads Anna Karenina, and instead of asking why did Anna die, they talk about the land ownership in Russia and stuff. So everything is complicated, complex, convoluted, all that stuff. And those are the kinds of things that I think are driving science away from what's really useful. Now, of course, we have to define what is useful in the first place. Okay, if we want to have Web3 solve the scientific publishing problem, or even more grandiose, solve the science problem, well, then maybe we should also ask ourselves, what is it we actually want from science? And of course, that's an open question. But I would say that we don't want science to be a prestige-seeking endeavor for individuals at the cost of taxpayers. I think that probably is not a good idea. I think a better idea would be a better alignment with ideas and monetizable outcomes. And that's just my conjecture. And of course, that again is open for debate. But I would say that ideas and monetizable outcomes are probably more interesting. So it's more like a kind of like a venture capital type of world. And I would say venture capital is very similar in a sense that it invests in very young, fruitful startups that might or might not pan out into something big. So I think science should be a lot more driven by venture capital. And now if we go way back and we think about what does it take to create a growth in an economy? It takes ownership, it takes identity and monetization. And I want to squeeze in there between ownership and identity. I think we can also squeeze in property rights. Let's give them also their own. So 4 things: ownership, property rights, identity, and monetization. Those are the things you need. That's why capitalism has been so successful. That's why we have this enormous growth in the last 300 years, because those were the innovations that came after or with the Enlightenment, and then of course with the US Revolution and all that stuff. So those are the things that we need to have. Now, in order to get rid of the, let's say, the rent seeking of the publishing houses that at this point monopolize ideas and science. And by the way, you can throw in there also the universities, meaning the Harvards and of this world. They're rent seeking also. So there's a monopolization of ideas, of smart people, of prestige, of all these things in a few institutions at the university side and a few institutions on the publishing side. The way we could solve this is by creating Web3. Web3 offers a solution for all of these. It offers ownership, property rights, identity, and monetization. And this is why the people are so excited about it. With all this, we have additional, much more useful things, such as flexibility, speed, low cost of transaction, all that kind of stuff. Somebody in Iran can read research much easier on Web3 than today. I mean, blocking access is a lot harder for governments. Getting access to things is a lot cheaper. Maybe you can have a smart contract that allows ideas to be proliferated for money here, but if you're in Iran, or if you somehow can prove, again through identity and things like that, that you're in a suppressive regime, then you get it for free. So there's a lot of opportunity to be a lot more flexible about who reads it and how much people pay. So you have a lot more flexibility in pricing, access, all kinds of things like that. So having said all of that, now let's, so I think that's the opportunity in Web3, and I think it's a very interesting topic, and I'm happy to discuss more of it maybe later on. But now I want to jump over to Twitter, because all of these things actually apply to Twitter too. So in a sense, Twitter is nothing but a publishing platform. It's not scientific in a sense that it's, we're talking here about physics papers, but in a sense it is, because I think the biggest use case for Twitter is the intellectual side, ideas, opinions, all those kinds of things. So we could have the same applications here. We have ownership, property rights, identity, and monetization. And if we do this with, let's say, we use smart contracts, we could actually solve some of the Twitter problems. Some of the low-hanging fruit is, for example, how do we get rid of the bots? Well, we can have identity. We can actually have, and this is discussed in one of the recent episodes of the Ultra Rare podcast, you could even have synonyms. So you don't have to have identity a la it's only me. You can have synonyms, but you could have zero-knowledge proof concepts that allow the synonyms still to be applied to certain people, and therefore you can't have all these robots going around and diluting whatever is going on the platform. I think another big problem is trolling, and I think that can be solved with smart contracts. If you do things that are not desirable on the platform, then you get punished either by you have to pay a lot more to publish, or you can be excluded. But I would say exclusion is not the best idea, particularly not now if we talk about Elon Musk in per se buying this thing in the name of free speech. Well, then he should also honor everything. So I think we could have smart contracts solving for trolling, in a sense that it's just very, very expensive to troll, and therefore not desirable. So you can incentivize people to do X versus Y, and therefore create manners and all these kinds of things, which are very efficient in social contexts. And why couldn't that work also in the digital world? All we need, again, is ownership, identity, monetization, and property rights. And I think all these things are doable. So to summarize, I think the ideas from Web3 in terms of applying it to the publishing world, the scientific publishing world, are incredibly interesting. They show the potential for Web3, and they also are applicable to something like Twitter. And I think Musk buying Twitter is not such a waste of money and time. I think what Musk is trying to do here, I assume, he hasn't said it explicitly, is actually exactly that. He's trying to turn the decision-making of who says what and what is and what isn't to the platform instead of having authorities within Twitter or whatever decide what is and what isn't. I think that's also how we, in one of the recent episodes on this podcast, we defined free speech is simply an unauthoritative way to decide what is and what isn't. That's what free speech means. Freedom just means that nobody has the right per se to decide what isn't and what isn't. What is and what isn't. We can have incentives, monetary incentives. That's a good way. I'm open for other incentives, but I think monetary incentives, that's the best we can come up with as a human species right now, which is just simply, if you want to do something, you have to spend resources. It's the best way for people to align their interests and incentives with their energy consumption and usage. That's the best way. Of course, there's going to be pushback. It's capitalist, it's this and that. I'm open for discussion, but I'm setting out now my ideas for Elon Musk buying Twitter. So go along the lines of Web3. Actually look into the scientific publishing solutions that, let's say, the Ultra Rare podcast is offering, and there's probably other resources there. I mean, Vitalik Buterin's white paper on Ethereum is still one of the seminal papers, I think, that solve some of these problems, because it's all about, again, ownership, property rights, identity, and monetization. All of these things are possible with a Web3 platform in terms of smart contracts, tokenization, and all these things. And I think we can solve some of the big problems that Twitter has right now, and therefore really create a social network that is more efficient in delivering the kinds of results that we, I think, as a species, could be benefiting the most. And of course, that's a whole other conversation. What is it actually we want? So at this point, I think we can agree with what we don't want. We don't want trolling. We don't want bad conduct. So we can disincentivize trolling and bad conduct, and we can disincentivize fake identities, in other words, robots. So that's a start. And then, of course, things will take their own way. The last thing I want to mention here actually is the concept of composability. I think that's really very exciting. Composability means that you can create something and then other things can be created on top of those things. So a little bit like an open source software program where you write a little bit of an object-oriented piece of programming that then goes into a bigger piece, like a function that can be used in other parts of the same program or even another algorithm, and so on and so forth. So composability, of course, would be a fantastic application in scientific publishing and also on Twitter. In scientific publishing, it just means that, again, if I go back to Andrej Karpathy's data set, he puts a data set out, he tokenizes it. So that means that if people use that data set, then he gets paid a little bit every time it gets used. The smart contract makes sure that the more value the data set provides, the more also he gets paid, and others who use it also get paid, of course, and so on and so forth. So composability, I think, is a fantastic concept, and also that Web3 enables it. It's not that it's not possible today. We have things like IP, property rights, intellectual property. So we have things, but I think that Web3 could just be a lot more efficient. Thank you.